Hello and welcome to the Museum of Zoology's Winter Wildlife Livestream, Christmas Corals and Santa Claus. I'm Ros Wade, I'm the Learning Officer here at the museum, and I'm going to be your guide as we dive underwater to see creatures from the sea. So we'll be joined later by Dr. Emily Mitchell, our Curator of Invertebrates, who's here to answer all your questions about marine animals. So do get them ready for her in the comments on YouTube. Now, one thing we would really like your help with today is we'd like your help choosing a new Santa Claus. Now, that is Claus with a W. Get what we're talking about? So we've had staff, students and volunteers from around the museum nominate their animals that they think would make a really good new Santa Claus. And we'll be asking you to vote in the poll at the end of the show today. So to get us started, here are our first 3 nominations, and do tell us what you think in the comments.
My name's Ed Turner. I'm Curator of Insects here in the Museum of Zoology. And for my pitch for Santa Claus, I'd like to go for a praying mantis. And I've got a set specimen here. And I think these have got really fantastic claws. Their proper name for these is raptorial forelimbs, and these are gripping forelimbs covered in spikes. And this is of course how these wonderful insects can catch other insects for their food. And they can do this by seeing movement with their really huge eyes. You can see the huge eyes on the head of the mantis here. So I think these would make fantastic Santa Claus. Slightly scary Santa Claus, but really impressive.
I'm putting forward the Manel, also known as Pallas's cat. Now, I'll admit that part of why I love them is because of their permanently grumpy looking expression that is more Grinch than Santa, but they have lots of attributes that I think makes them an ideal candidate for the next Santa Claus. Living on the high altitude Central Asian steppe, they're used to the cold. They have the thickest fur of any cat. So body-wise, they're only the size of a house cat, but with all that fluff, they look nice and round like Santa. They're also solitary, so they won't have many distractions in the run-up to Christmas preparation, and they hide in caves and crevices waiting to ambush their prey. So I reckon they'd enjoy Santa's grotto, as long as there weren't any people there. I will say though that their diet mostly consists of small mammals like pikas, and that will be harder to find than a mince pie to put on the mantelpiece for Christmas Eve.
As a substitute for Santa Claus, I think my favourite animal would be the aye-aye, which is a type of lemur from Madagascar. Like Santa, it's nocturnal, has excellent hearing, so could hear if you're awake, and some folk beliefs claim that aye-ayes sneak through thatched roofs, but rather than leave gifts, would attack people in their sleep using that elongated middle finger with his little hooked claw. But that doesn't seem very likely. In fact, that long middle finger is used for feeding. It taps on trees to find insect grubs, gnaws holes in the wood to get closer, and then winkles them out with that elongated digit, hooking the grubs out. I can't help but think its expression looks like a stressed parent the night before Christmas. But having that elongated finger would be fantastic for winkling out those tricky chocolates in the bottom of the box.
So what did you think of those? Tell us in the comments, and we'll launch the poll once you've seen all the nominations later in the show. Now, today's live stream is all about life under the sea. And what better place to start than by taking a look at some of the wildlife found around the coast of the UK. So what we're going to show you next is a little film we've put together about one of my favourite things to do when I go to the seaside, and that's looking in rock pools.
Rock pools are the pools of water that are left behind in the hollows and crevices of rocky shores when the tide goes out. They form their own miniature ecosystems, complete with algae, herbivores and carnivores. Here are a few of the animals we spotted in these rock pools on the west coast of Scotland in early summer. There's a huge range of different types of seaweed. Some are feathery and branched. Some have long filaments. Some have gas bladders that can go pop. And some are encrusting, covering the surfaces of the rocks themselves. More seaweeds here, you may think, but take a closer look and you can see moving tentacles. These are sea anemones, a type of animal related to corals and jellyfish. The tentacles are being used to capture food from the water and bring it to the mouth in the centre of the animal. These rock pools contain lots of shells, Some are empty, but there are many with the animals still inside. In the bottom left of this picture, you can see a couple of mussels with their purple shells gaping slightly so they can feed. Here are some limpets and periwinkles, two different types of marine gastropod or sea snail. Limpets have cone-shaped shells and are famed for being able to stick fast to rocks, helping protect the animal inside from drying out when the tide goes out. Periwinkles have a pointed, coiled shell. They are grazers feeding on seaweed and detritus. The striped shell on the rock in the bottom left of this picture is a top shell, another grazer feeding on seaweed and algae on rocks. Not all mollusk shells are quite what they seem. The gastropod shell moving around in the middle of this picture has a new inhabitant, a hermit crab. Only the front part of a hermit crab has its own hard armour, and it uses empty mollusk shells to protect the softer parts behind. Bigger than the hermit crab is this shore crab scuttling sideways along the bottom of the pool. These animals hunt and scavenge for all sorts of different animal prey to eat. Here's another rock pool crustacean, a prawn. Look carefully and you can see it beating the little flaps under the abdomen to help it to swim forwards. Around the same size as the prawns are some of the small rock pool fish. There are a number of different species that look quite similar to one another that can be found on rocky shores. This one looks to be a goby, with its two dorsal fins. Rock gobies are common in rock pools, feeding on smaller crustaceans, worms and other animals. And there we have it, just a few of the animals you might see in rock pools around the UK.
Now, did you know that we run a free Young Zoologists Club for 6 to 12-year-olds here at the museum? Well, a few weeks ago, we invited our young zoologists into the museum after hours to make puppets of their favourite underwater creatures. And here's the result.
I like my animals because it's so cute. Hey dude, I'm gonna go ride that turtle over there, if I can reach. Okay, I hope crabs know how to jump. Huh, looks like they do. Pretty sweet on you. Hey, watch out! I chose this fish because it has really sharp teeth and it looks like a gator, and so I can move its mouth, and I can also move its tail. Squids use jet propulsion to maneuver in the water. Squids have one large eye and one small eye. The reason I chose a green turtle is because I really, really love green turtles.
I just absolutely love those. They are so brilliant and creative. Now, if you want to have a go at making one of these puppets yourself, we are making them at our Winter Wildlife event that's taking place here in the museum this Saturday, the 10th of December, from 12 until 4 p.m. If you can't make it to the museum, there is a little video. We've got one here and a blog post that shows you how you can make one at home. So now I think it is time for our next set of nominations for a new Santa Claus. Now tell us what you think in the comments, and remember which are your favourites for our poll that's going to take place later in the show. Surely Santa Claus must be a crab, and my nomination for Santa Claus is the giant Japanese spider crab. Now, true, it doesn't have claws that are quite as massive as those on a male fiddler crab, and what a surprise that is all about attracting a female. But it has the biggest leg span of any arthropod. It can measure up to 3.7 metres from claw to claw. It's truly massive, and surely legs that long must help in delivering presents down chimneys. Not only that, but spider crabs are a type of decorator crab. They adorn their shells, particularly when they're young, with things like sponges and anemones, and that just makes me even more in the festive spirit.
Hi, my name's Evie, and I'm going to give you 3 reasons why the owls, such as this common barn owl, should be crowned the next Santa Claus. So firstly, that they fly, meaning that they have the perfect method of transport in order to get round all the different houses of the different children in the world and deliver their presents. Secondly, is that owls are often associated with being quite wise, which I think you would have to be in order to undertake such an enormous feat and deliver all of the presents to everyone in the world. And lastly, that most owls are nocturnal, meaning that they only come out at night. And if this doesn't scream Santa Claus, I don't know what does. So those are my 3 reasons why I think the owl should be crowned the next Santa Claus.
My choice for Santa Claus is the animal with the biggest claws in the museum, I think. So these here, it's the giant ground sloth, which grew to about 4 tons when it lived until about 10,000 years ago in South America. So it's about the same size as an elephant. So you'd probably notice if it landed on your roof and would need to be dragged by some giant deer perhaps instead of reindeer. Giant ground sloths were the largest burrowing animals. Huge tunnels have been found in South America with claw marks from these sloths. So I think they'd be quite at home in your chimney coming down to deliver your presents, though perhaps it might do some damage.
Now, we promised you your chance to put your questions to our expert in marine invertebrates here at the museum, and it is nearly time for that to happen. Dr. Emily Mitchell will be joining us in just a couple of minutes, so do get your questions ready for her. And to get you in the undersea mood and find out a little bit more about these amazing marine invertebrates, here she is with a few stories about them from around the museum.
There are many, many different sorts of animals that live in the ocean. We often think of the vertebrates, that is, things like sharks and fish, but a huge amount of the ocean animals are what's known as invertebrates. So these are animals without bones. So invertebrates are incredibly varied, from things like corals and sponges, which look almost plant-like because they don't move around and they don't have eyes or tentacles or anything like that, to the really complex, large, intelligent organisms like octopus and squid. And octopus are really, really smart. There's some wonderful examples from captive octopus where they've managed to untie jars to get food, or one particular one, they couldn't understand why the light in its aquarium kept on going out. And so they put up a little video, and what they found was that it would squirt water at the light, it would short, and then when the engineer came to change the light bulb, he would play with the octopus for a little bit. And so all the octopus wanted was some company, and it worked out by shorting out the light bulb, that was the way to get it. So we all know that the oceans are subject to anthropogenic change. So humans are leading to the oceans changing through pollution, through overfishing, and through climatic changes such as global warming. But how does this affect all the different organisms that live in the ocean? So we're probably familiar with coral bleaching, where corals get really stressed and release all the little symbionts, the little algae which they need to survive. But climatic changes and anthropogenic changes don't stop there. Through things like overfishing of large predatory fish, this changes the dynamics of how different organisms interact with the water. One of the consequences that's starting to emerge is different sorts of organisms are taking the roles that fish used to occupy. So, for example, jellyfish are becoming more and more abundant. So jellyfish are very good at adapting to different sorts of environmental changes. When they reproduce, they produce little polyps that sit on the ocean floor, and then they hatch when the environmental conditions are ready. But if you have some very bad years, it's too cold or too hot, the jellyfish won't hatch, they'll just stay there. Whereas fish, for example, will hatch, and then most of the fish babies will die because the environmental conditions aren't right. The jellyfish will stay and wait. And so say you have a few years where you have really bad environments, when you finally have a good environmental year, you have the same amount of fish, but you have potentially 3, 4, 5 times the amount of jellyfish. And because they're competing with the same food as the baby fish, the poor fish get swamped out and you get a lot more jellyfish. Now this is problematic because they're not eaten by the same things. They're a lot less nutritious, jellyfish, compared to fish. So this is a problem for all the things that rely on the fish for a food source. The jellyfish are kind of taking over the oceans in a way, but they're not being able to provide the nutrients to other organisms, and so you're breaking down the ecosystem dynamics. So octopus and squid and cuttlefish are a group of organisms called cephalopods. Climatic changes are actually really helping the octopus and the cephalopods and their numbers. So the reasons for this aren't really well understood. One possibility is that with the overfishing of large predatory fish like sharks, there's more food available for the large Humboldt squid, for example, as well as octopus. Another idea is that because they have very, very short lifespans, often some squid are just 1 or 2 years, it means that they can reproduce very, very quickly, and so they can adapt to climatic changes much, much faster. Another thing that's happening with cephalopods is they grow relatively fast compared to vertebrates, sometimes eating as much as 30% of their body weight in a single day, which is great for them. They can grow and get big very, very quickly, but what they're doing is then taking away more food from other organisms such as fish, and so that can potentially put the ecosystem out of balance.
And now I'm joined live by Emily. Hello.
Hey.
Thank you for joining us this evening. Now, you're our newest curator in the museum. Are there any particular specimens that you've spied in your time here that are really interesting to you?
Well, there are so many wonderful specimens, it's hard to pick a favourite. But very much speaking to my own biases and loving invertebrates, I'm really fond of the slide collection that we have from Darwin of all the barnacles.
Yeah.
Because I think it's so cool to see that kind of how he collected his data and how he then used this information to try and understand evolution and build up his theories.
Yeah, no, it's really great, and you can sort of, I don't know, I look at those and it looks like he just wanted to find out stuff really quickly.
Yes.
They're not very tidy, are they?
No, well, it's really funny because he found like one that was quite interesting, and then slowly got more and more involved, and he ended up spending 8 years studying all of barnacles from just one specimen.
Not interesting, but 8 years, that's a long time.
It is, yes.
So the oceans are pretty vast, and we saw you talking in your video about jellyfish numbers and squid numbers increasing. How do we actually collect the data to know that kind of thing?
So it's actually incredibly hard. So when we're counting things like fish, it's quite easy to kind of put some sort of tag on them. So then we can track them using things like satellites or acoustic receivers, so we can detect where the different sounds are coming from. But if something is soft and squishy, like a jellyfish, we can't do that. So it makes it really, really hard. And I actually spent some time during my master's project trying to understand different ways that we could potentially count jellyfish. And so we tried lots of different methods out on the Irish Sea. So we took it in turns to stand at the bow of the deck and count the jellyfish we saw in the ocean. We also used big nets to haul them up. And so this is often how people count things like squid, for example, is looking at bycatch of fisheries. So you can see, you're trying to find one particular fish, but you can see what's happening to fish and octopus and other things that get caught by accident. Jellyfish are quite problematic because if you get too many of them together, they all mush out. And so we got one particularly big haul that scooped up so many jellyfish, they basically started seeping through the net. And so the entire deck was covered in about 1.5 foot of jellyfish mush.
Wow.
So we couldn't count them because it's just buckets. It was really not very useful.
They really are jelly-ish.
Yes, yeah. They're quite
Yeah.
relatively solid in the water, but then yes, if you push too many of them together, the pressure just compresses them, and poor things don't do very well. And then the other thing we looked at was something called acoustic sounding. So this is used a lot for boats trying to find big fish shoals, is you bounce off sonar off the bottom of your boat, and then when you get big fish shoals, they'll disrupt the sound and how it bounces back. And so you can then predict where the fish will be. And we tried doing that for jellyfish, and we couldn't really get particularly strong signals, unfortunately, because, again, the density of jellyfish is very different to fish. So we tried a few different methods, and none of them were particularly successful at the time. But I think people have done a lot better now with better sorts of technology trying to detect them remotely.
Yeah. It's one of those things. It sounds simple. Just count the jellyfish, but when you start to look at it, it's quite a complicated thing to do. Yeah, it's really fascinating. So we've had a couple of questions come in already, so I think we'll go straight to those. So Henry asks, what were the first animals in the ocean?
That is a really wonderful question, Henry, and something very close to my heart, because I actually study the first animals that ever existed. And these are actually found, they lived in the very, very deep ocean, kind of kilometres deep, back 600 million years ago. And we're not actually sure what they were, because they look so weird. They look unlike anything else that's alive today or elsewhere in the fossil record. But we think they're kind of broadly related to corals or sponges. So they didn't move around. They just stuck to the seafloor and fed from little tiny animals and plankton in the water column.
Wow. And how long ago was this?
So this was about 600 million years ago.
600 million years ago.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, things have changed a lot since then.
Yes, just a little. So then Felix has asked, what makes octopuses so clever?
Wow, that's a really, really good question, something that a lot of people are trying to figure out. So one idea is that they've actually they've got the same sort of genes that code for human brains and human intelligence. And so that gives them kind of advantages that other aquatic organisms don't have.
Wow, so more similar to us than might
Yes,
think.
yes, yeah.
Christina asks, what is the most colourful jellyfish? Are they very colourful?
They can get really colourful. They tend to have like more than being, so like something like a parrot or a coral is very brightly coloured all over, whereas jellyfish tend to have bits of them, so kind of little frilly bits or tentacles that are very brightly coloured in blues or purples. So something like a Portuguese man of war is very, very deadly, but has beautiful long stinging strings that are bright blue, so they're very beautiful. The most beautiful one would be hard to pick up.
Yes. I always find, I was a terrible person asking you your favourite specimens at the beginning. I know that's really hard. Anything that's to do with favourite or most beautiful is really, really hard to answer.
It is so hard, yes.
So Isla asks, how many different types of coral are there?
Oh, wow, that's a really, really good question. So it depends really how you think of, kind of how you define your different types of coral. So, for example, when we think of coral, we think of the very hard, kind of big, kind of encrusting coral that covers kind of the shallow seafloors in tropical water. But before that, millions of years ago, we had different sorts of corals. So some were just kind of solitary, so they lived by themselves, they looked a bit like ice cream cones. And others looked more like, bryozoans, so kind of small little animals that kind of grew encrusted on things. So those are the major groups of coral, but you also have soft corals. So we think of corals being hard, but some of them actually are quite soft and squishy and look kind of a bit like broccoli.
This is quite a diversity. Yeah.
Yes, they're very, very diverse.
Yeah. Okay, so Hannah, how did cuttlefish grow their cartilage bone? Because they have what's it made out of, cuttlefish bone that's inside? It's not bone, is it?
It's not. It's probably cartilage. That's exactly the kind of question I should know, but I'm not actually sure. Okay. That's very, very interesting question. I mean, so things like octopus, other cephalopods. So things like cuttlefish and squid and octopus are all cephalopods, and they have what's known as beaks, which are very hard, kind of feeding kind of beaks, mouths, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
That I'm going to look that up when I leave.
Okay, there we go. So, next question is from Elena. Now, do you have a favourite example of, this is somebody who knows, I think, a bit about the oceans, a favourite example of deep sea gigantism?
Oh, that's a very good one.
Yeah.
Favourite example of gigantism.
Shall we explain what gigantism is? Because it might be...
So gigantism is when you have exceptionally, massively large examples of particular species that normally you find elsewhere in the oceans, but they're normally a lot smaller.
Okay.
I mean, the colossal squid is the one that springs to mind.
Which I'm guessing is quite big.
Yes, because it's the biggest. Yes,
Yeah. So, but how big is a colossal squid? Because when I think of a squid, I think of something, a big squid as being something that's about that big. How big is a?
Oh, they can get as big as as long as a bus. Like they can get huge. Yes, yeah.
Wow, that is
really,
amazing.
really long.
It's an enormous animal. It's amazing. So I'm going to apologise now because I may not pronounce some of these names correctly. But Pai says sharks and rays belong to the same family, but why do they look so different? So why do sharks and skate? I mean, this is vertebrates, but still marine.
I can just about
pronounce this one. Yeah.
So it's very interesting because when we think about sharks, we think of things like a classic great white shark, for example, so a kind of sharky shark or a reef shark. But you actually get some really funny sharks that actually look much closer to rays. So they, instead of being kind of lots of, I guess, triangles and pointy bits, they're kind of much kind of shorter and squatter, and they live on the sea floor. And their kind of dorsal fins, for example, instead of being triangular, like kind of, I guess, your sharky sharks, they're much broader. And so they start to approximate rays. So it's very easy when we're thinking of them to think of the kind of most extreme examples, but there is some middle ground.
Okay.
And I think that the other aspect, you don't get sharky-looking rays, to be fair, but it's also the way that their kind of bodies are put together. While from the outside they look very different, on the inside they look a lot more similar. So if we think about us and like dolphins and whales, for example, we look very, very different, but actually our skeletons have lots of similarities.
Yeah, no, that's very good answer like that. So Balaji, do jellyfishes have bones?
They don't have bones. No.
Hence the mush.
Hence the mush,
Yeah.
yes. So jellyfish are a type of invertebrate, which means that they don't have bones. And so all kind of, I guess, vertebrates, so things like humans and dogs and sharks, they kind of are able to move around, and they get their body structure through their internal skeleton, which is a series of bones. So invertebrates don't have this internal body structure, but there are various different ways that they get their kind of are able to stay kind of in one single body. And it's things like exoskeletons. So things like crabs will have a harder outer shell, and that's an exoskeleton, which is different. Jellyfish, poor things, don't have anything like that, but they have what's known as a hydrostatic skeleton. So because they're in the water, they kind of they keep their form due to pressures of the water compared to the pressures of their body.
Oh, very clever, very clever. So this is from somebody who's called themselves the Trick Master. How did the sea form and animals grow in the sea?
Wow, how did the sea form?
This is going back a long time in history.
Wow. So the sea formed, I can't remember exactly, but it will have been, so the Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago.
That's even longer than 600 million.
Yes, so it's a really, really long time. So if you think about, so one of the nice ways to visualise quite how long time ago this was, is if you think of the history of life on Earth as your arm. So you've got the arm, you're kind of the Earth formed around there, and then you've got all of life on Earth, right? You get life forming around the armpit after, right?
Oh, and that's quite soon.
Yes, you do, and they're all little microbes, and they're not terribly interesting, if we're honest. But you don't actually get animals till right till the knuckles.
Wow.
Yeah. So you get all this time, you just have little microbes, and then you have and so the oceans formed very early on, and it's the and then we had life in the form of these tiny little microbes at around 4 billion. But then, so the oceans were swirling around, and the animals only started evolving, relatively recently.
Yeah, that's a really good. I'm going to use that one. That's a really good one. Yes. So Katrina asks, how much venom does a box jellyfish have? Because they're really venomous, aren't they? They're quite dangerous.
Yeah, they're really, really dangerous. I don't know how you quantify venom. I think that would be one for Jason. One of our other curators who studies snakes. I think he would probably know quantifications of venoms. But they can kill you very, very easily with very little amounts. Yeah. Whatever that.
So perhaps it's the strength of the venom and what it does rather than the volume that's particularly important here.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So Henry asks, are corals plants or animals?
So this is something that I get a lot, asked a lot, and especially with the fossils I study as well, because they look superficially very, very like plants. Yeah. And so with the earliest animals, we know they aren't plants because the rocks that they were found in could only be formed in very, very deep water, well below where light can get to. So we know that they could have been photosynthetic like plants are, so that is they couldn't get their energy from sunlight. So corals people often think of as being plant-like because they often live in the shallow water. And they do have little kind of microbes inside them which do photosynthesize. So it's a symbiotic relationship. And indeed it's this losing of these little symbionts that makes them bleach and gets them all sad and stressed. But we know, because of the way they build their bodies, and yes, we know that they're not actually plants at all, they're actually animals.
Yeah, it's interesting when we get these things that seem to blur between big groups of stuff, isn't it? Yeah, it's fascinating. So, Rose asks, do jellyfish have brains?
So jellyfish don't have brains in the way that we think of brains, but they do have the capacity to sense.
Okay.
So there's a kind of spectrum between kind of brains like we have, hopefully, and then you have some sorts of insects where the brains are actually spread out over quite a kind of relatively large area in the skull, and it's not so compressed. And then you have kind of more neural nets, so it's networks of nerves with centres that are kind of brain-like. But at that kind of division, it's quite difficult. Jellyfish, though, are quite close on the kind of like not brain, no brains at all, but they do have the capacity to sense their surroundings and adapt to that.
So they still have like a nervous system and everything
Exactly,
like that, but
yes.
it's just very, very different to ours.
Exactly, yes, yeah.
So Zoe asks, how old are the earliest jellyfish and what species is it?
Ooh, so that is a wonderful question. So the oldest jellyfish are found around about 550 million years ago, but the first fossil specimens are a bit, they're very, very rare. And so you only see them more frequently occurring at 500 rather than 550. What species were they? It's an extinct species, but quite similar in many ways to the moon jellyfish you see around the UK. So they're generally about that big, and they've got the kind of 4 circles on. Yeah. So they had some similarities to that sort of
I mean, how do jellyfish fossils form? I mean, they're so soft.
Yes,
that's quite extraordinary.
Yeah. So it is. It's really difficult to get soft-bodied fossils. So normally, when we think of fossils, we think of things with bones, such as dinosaurs, or we think of things with hard shells, so things like trilobites. So the exoskeletons we talked about. And the reason these fossilise is because they take a long time to break down when we're kind of naturally just left after they died, and so there's a lot more chance for them to get to get incorporated into the rocks and the rock record. Whereas if it's soft, you need lots of very special things to happen. So you need to make sure that once it's died, nothing eats it. But you also need to make sure that it doesn't get broken down by bacteria. So if you have a rotting carcass, that's not going to preserve very well. So you need very, very special events to happen. And you tend to actually get quite a lot of these happening around the early animals because you have less kind of adapted predators for scavenging, for example. And you also get much larger areas of the ocean which didn't have any oxygen in, so stuff couldn't live in. And so this helps preservation, because if you've got all your kind of nice creatures living up in the oxygen part of the ocean, and then they die and then sink through to the bottom, then there's nothing to eat them because nothing can live and don't get the bacteria. So then if they get covered by for example, a big amount of sediment or sand coming in, squashing them, they'll then stay the way they were pretty much when they died.
Wow, yeah. So it takes quite a lot then.
It really is very, very special. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got loads of questions. It's great having so many questions. So Alex asks, what are you most interested in and why?
What am I most interested in? So I am really, really interested in understanding kind of the first animals. So kind of what is driving their evolution in a wonderful world. It'd be good to understand why they evolved when they did, because there's so long where we didn't have complex animal-like life on Earth, and then after 3 billion years we get them. And so one of the questions, I mean, I haven't worked out how to study this, but what I'd love to know very much is, did animals kind of almost get lucky evolving here on Earth, in that it was really, really hard and you need so many things to occur in order for us to be here, versus, but maybe we were actually quite bad at it, and so we just kept trying and failing, and that's why we get so many microbes. But most of my work involves fossils in Newfoundland and Canada and in Charnwood Forest here in the UK. And what I do is I look at the fossils and how they're preserved on the rock surface, and then work out what the ecosystem was doing and how they're interacting with each other to try and work out what's driving their evolution.
Wow, it sounds, it's fascinating. And it's, I always find it quite exciting that even in the UK, we've got some pretty cool rocks, don't we, in the UK?
Yes. I mean, the first ever, what's known as Precambrian, so these first animal fossils that were found in rocks known to be that old was here in the UK in Charnwood Forest.
Wow.
And so kind of it's been known for a very long time that you had what's known as Cambrian rocks at about 500 million years, where you suddenly see a lot of fossils all over the world in all sorts of shapes and forms, things like trilobites and the trails of different animals as well. And Darwin was really upset by this because he could see animals and life emerging really clearly in the fossil record. But if his ideas of natural selection and evolution were correct, things shouldn't appear suddenly. They should gradually evolve and adapt. And you don't see this. And then just, in the 1950s, some school children found these fossils in Charnwood Forest rocks. And because we knew that they were older than the oldest, Darwin would have been very happy. It's like these were the kind of missing link for him.
Just 100 years late.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so Christina asks, how similar is our skeleton to a dolphin's? So you mentioned that earlier.
Yes.
So, yes.
So one of the kind of nice examples to think about is that we think of dolphins and we see their fins, and I don't know, in your head you can imagine them kind of looking very, very different internally, but actually if you look at the skeletons, they look like little hands, just kind of all together.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, obviously we don't have tails.
Yes.
But it's things like that and the kind of positioning of our kind of ribs and vertebral columns, things like that.
Yeah. I always find that if you come into the museum, do take a good look at our fin whale skeleton, because I find it extraordinary how many similarities you can see.
Yes.
The trick master again. Do octopuses have lots of brains, and if they do, why?
So octopuses, again, it's they don't have lots of brains in the way that you've got kind of 3 human brains all kind of lined up in a row. What they do is they have a lot of neural matter that's spread amongst their kind of head kind of cavity, I guess, inside their head. So it's many different centres that they use, and that's part of why they can squish through small holes. Is they don't have one big thing. It's kind of more amorphous than that.
Yeah. So we've got a question. We're getting so many questions. This is great. It's great. Joe asks, why do so many things evolve towards looking like crabs? I've seen this coming up on a couple of sort of Twitter pages.
Hi, Joe. So this is a really, really good question. And so we think of crabs as being this single entity, but actually it turns out that crab-like body form with the hard shells and the kind of claws has actually evolved independently multiple different times. And sometimes it's evolved and then lost again. And trying to understand this is really, really difficult and something that's a very active area of investigation at the moment.
So we don't know yet.
We don't know yet, no.
Connie asks, what is the most venomous creature in the sea? Might that be a box jellyfish? Or is there
a box jellyfish. There's also, I've forgotten the name, there's these tiny little jellyfish that live in Australia that are even more venomous, I think. And they're very, very lethal if you come in contact. They begin with O, but I can't remember. But they're tiny.
Tiny.
Yeah.
We'll see if we can find out.
Yes.
Put it in the comments later.
Yeah.
So, Pai asks, and I apologise if I pronounced that incorrectly, Pai, are there any videos of the battle between sperm whales and giant squids in the deep sea? That'd be amazing.
That'd be amazing. Not that I've seen.
No.
But they are, yes.
Yeah. Because you get the beaks, don't you, in the stomachs?
Yes,
Yeah.
And you can see them in fossilised creatures as well. You can see all the beaks when they've been, lots of squid have been eaten,
Wow, so they last as well.
Yeah.
Henry asks, is it safe to swim with stingrays? They scare me a bit.
It is actually really safe to swim with stingrays, and there have been 1 or 2 cases where things haven't gone very well, but that's really, really unusual, and actually you have to upset a stingray an awful lot and get very unlucky. So lots of people will accidentally step on stingrays, and and the stingrays will obviously try to protect themselves by stinging their legs. But this is, I mean, it's a bit painful, but it's not actually particularly bad for you long term.
Okay. So yes, go and swim with stingrays as long as you're careful and you don't then.
Yes.
So Tracy asks, what is your favourite fish? Sorry, that's a really hard question. What is your favourite fish?
I love whale sharks. I think they're just amazing. Absolutely amazing. So whale sharks are the largest fish in the sea, and they're this beautiful kind of greeny blue colour, and they've got this wonderful pattern of kind of white dots and lines on. Yeah, and they just eat like little plankton, so tiny little animals.
Yeah, big gentle giants.
Yes,
nice. Theo asks, where were the first jellyfish fossils found? And Zoe, where was the first sea life found? So it's similar questions.
So the first jellyfish weren't the first animals. So there are some potential kind of Russian specimens of jellyfish, but you do get absolutely gorgeous ones that look like they were kind of almost a photograph of modern jellyfish that's squished from China, Xinjiang, around Qinjiang, about 508 million years ago. They're just absolutely amazing. In terms of where you find the fossils of the oldest kind of animals, so yes, Leicestershire in the UK and Newfoundland, Canada are the best places for that. Yeah.
Okay. So Shika asks, is the recent finding of the 2 million year old DNA likely to shed more light on marine animals?
So I think that paper itself, which was led by people within the Department of Zoology, I believe. So it's really, really fascinating because it's 2 million year old DNA. And so the techniques that they use are really, really useful and potentially could be used in a wide range of settings, including marine animals, yes.
So is this from the ancient DNA lab? Yes. It's fantastic, amazing stuff. Zoe asks, do you find different jellyfish in different depths of the sea? I think there's a lot of love for jellyfish today.
There is, yes, rightly so. Rightly so. You do see a lot of variation in depth with things like jellyfish. But what's very interesting is you also see a lot of travelling of jellyfish up and down the water column. So it's very variable, but you do see a lot of variation, yes.
Yeah. So Emily, age 6, what colour are baby colossal jellyfish?
What colour are they? I'm not sure. You get a lot of squids that are kind of reddish and pinkish colours. You do get, cuttlefish can change colour, which is really, really cool. And you can see, so some of the grown-ups, not the babies, they've learned how to kind of mesmerise their prey, so they will change their colours so it's like flashing patterns. It's kind of hypnotic, and the prey's like, what on earth is that? And they come along and eat it.
It's quite a technique.
Yes.
And Isla asks, if a jellyfish is washed up on the beach, is it dead, or would it be okay if the tide comes in again?
Jellyfish can't last very long outside the water, unfortunately. So, because slightly coming back to what we talked about, skeletons, they can't support themselves very well outside water, and they also dry up, which is quite sad. So if you see, if you see one and you know it's not a venomous one, if you chuck it back in straight away, they can survive. But they do die a lot quicker than fish would, for example.
Okay. So unfortunately, possibly not. Sorry, I know. So I've got one last question. That's all the questions I've got so far from the audience. But if we get any others coming in, we'll see what we can do about answering them in our blog. But I have one last question for you. And we've been asking staff and students and volunteers across the museum who they would nominate as a new Santa Claus.
Yes.
Who would you nominate as a new Santa Claus?
A new Santa Claus? I think it would have to be a Yeti crab. So Yeti crabs are fantastic. They live very, very deep in the ocean, near hydrothermal vents, and they're white and they have fluffy claws. And so they have this white fluff, and the bacteria live on them, and then they eat it. And sometimes, people think they might actually farm the bacteria by kind of wafting in front of hydrothermal vents, although that's a bit debatable. But I think they'd be very good as a new Santa Claus because they could hide from the rest of the world when it wasn't Christmas time. So it's not like kind of something that lives on land and have to spend its entire time kind of hiding from other humans. They could just retreat to the deep sea, stay nice and safe and secret, and then pop back out.
Guess it'd be quite good with chimneys as well.
Yes, they would be. They'd like that a lot.
Okay, thank you so much for that. It's been really, really fascinating. And I've learned a lot and a lot about jellyfish today. Thank you for those questions as well. It's been really great. So that last nomination brings us to our last set of nominations for a new Santa Claus. And get ready to vote for your favourite after this little video.
Let me introduce you to our lion skeleton. It's this one right here. Now, I think the lion should be our next Santa Claus because look at those. They have really sharp, strong claws to help them hunt their prey, but they can also retract them into their skin so that they can have really soft pads when they're stalking their prey as well, making no sound at all. Now, another reason why a lion would be the best Santa Claus is that if we're going to have a replacement for Santa's beard, why not be a lion's fabulous mane?
Okay, so my substitute Santa is a bilby, and the bilby has definitely got some lovely claws, especially on its front feet, as you'll see there. It comes from Australia, and it's a marsupial. And the other reason that I think it makes a great Santa Claus substitute is that it's also got a sack. Well, the females have got a sack, so it's more of a Mother Christmas than a Father Christmas. But they've got a sack on their back. It's the pouch where their baby Joey lives. But unlike marsupials you might be more familiar with, like a kangaroo, the Joey goes onto the animal's back. And the reason for that is that it's digging so hard with its claws that if the Joey was underneath, it'd get showered with mud, and we want to avoid that. And the final reason that I think it makes a really good substitute Santa is that by doing all that digging, it helps to turn over the soil in Australia, in quite parched parts of Australia, keep it healthy and in good condition, so it leaves us a present.
I think the next Santa Claus should be a spider like this, which have tarsal claws on the very ends of their feet. They'd be great at delivering presents all around the world. They're super fast, they're quite scary, so there wouldn't be any bad children out there. Everyone would be good. And they can run up the walls and hold so many different presents with all the different legs. They're incredibly efficient at being Santa. For all of these great reasons, that's why I think a spider should be the next Santa Claus.
So now you've seen all of our nominations for a new Santa Claus, so it is time to vote. You can find a link to our poll for the best Santa Claus in the comments, or if you want to vote on a different device, you can go to slido.com and use the code 3338051, or if you want to, you can even have a go at scanning this QR code and it should take you straight to the poll. Now, while we are waiting for the results to come in, we love to give you top tips on how to be a bit more sustainable here at the museum. And so how about a way of wrapping your Christmas presents in reusable fabric wraps rather than using any plastic or paper? We have a little video that will show you how. Okay, so we are nearly at the end of this year's Winter Wildlife live stream, and we've had a few other suggestions from you for Santa Claus, and these are fantastic as well. So we've had a wolverine, yeah, very known for their claws, those ones. Tasmanian devil, you don't want to get on the wrong side of one of those. And then a non-giant sloth, because of course our sort of three-toed and two-toed sloths, they have some pretty fabulous claws as well. So the results are in. So before we go, we've got all the all-important results. So we have quite a clear-looking winner of... Oh, let's just check this. You have quite a clear winner of a Pallas, the Pallas cat. It does look like the grumpy Grinch cat, followed by a Yeti crab, Japanese spider crab, giant ground sloth, spider mantis, and bilby. So yeah. Thank you so much for that. We've got some great results, and we hope that you enjoyed the live stream today. Thank you for your absolutely brilliant questions for Emily as well. Really, really enjoyed hearing all about those amazing marine animals. To finish today, I thought we'd finish with a little film that we've created all about watching winter wildlife, and we hope to see you again soon.
It may be cold and tree branches bare of leaves, but there is still life in our landscapes and drama in the skies, and much to enjoy on a walk in the wild or closer to home. There is still birdsong, like these starlings in the suburbs. And here is the bright song of a wren. The River Cam is a great place to spot birds, like this swan that still has its grey juvenile feathers. And, of course, the majestic heron preying on the water's edge. Our local fenland habitats are rich with atmosphere on a crisp winter's day, with grasses swaying in the wind and still waters. Seeds and berries support local bird life, like these goldfinches chattering in the trees. Winter is a wonderful time to watch wading birds and waterfowl. Golden plovers and lapwings jostle on the islands in the freshwater marsh at Titchwell in Norfolk. Flocks of birds fly over. And teal ducks dabble in the shallows. And at Welney, winter visiting whooper swans add an elegant look to the wetland habitat, an illusion slightly broken by their honking call. Most of the whooper swans in the UK are visiting here from Iceland, arriving in late autumn and leaving again in spring to fly north to their breeding grounds. As well as swans, flocks of ducks and geese grace the waters at Welney, from the chestnut head of the male pochard to the extraordinary beak of the shoveler, and skeins of Canada and greylag geese. There's loads to watch and enjoy over the winter months.